Today, the travel and tourism industry is one of the largest and fastest growing sectors in the world. Sport tourism is a crucial part of the travel and tourism industry and will be instrumental in the sector's development. Economies are increasingly reliant on the combination of sports and tourism to put a destination on the map, stimulate economic development, attract tourists. Sport tourism offers a wide range of opportunities: participation, spectator, luxury, nostalgia. Tapping into that passion is highly lucrative. Eurosport is highly involved in the travel and tourism industry.
We truly believe that the passion points of sport and tourism connect so well with each other.
Eurosport reaches desirable European travelers with particular emphasis on business travelers. Eurosport offers innovative solutions to governments, tourist boards, airlines, and hotel groups. Custom solutions include media coverage of sporting events and country promotion, production of tailor-made editorial content.
Can you tell us a little words about this place?
There is no better way to see Durban at its finest.
Multi-platform and interactive communication opportunities. Integrated partnerships with governments, federations, or promoters. Eurosport commissions effectiveness studies through external companies. Studies have revealed that the Eurosport viewer is a highly valuable target compared to the non-viewer. Thanks to our strong presence and expertise, Eurosport can assist advertisers and engage in efficient partnerships.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this panel discussion on future trends in sports tourism. My name's Terry Stevens. My job is simply to facilitate us through the next hour and encourage discussion from a wonderful panel of experts representing all aspects of the industry that is fast-growing, high value, as you've just seen in this video, and according to the World Tourism Organization, one of the fastest-growing sectors within tourism over the next 5 to 10 years. I'd like to acknowledge the work of W2 Consulting and their two directors, Keith Wood and Mark O'Connell, for putting together this event and this panel. It's part of a sequence. The first European Sports Tourism Summit took place in Limerick last year. The second one will take place in Limerick, Ireland next year. And this panel discussion at World Travel Market was a direct outcome of that event in Limerick. Ministers from around the world yesterday discussed the importance of mega events, including sporting events, as a key part of their ongoing agenda. In Sochi earlier this year, a group of ministers from around the world specifically looked at sports tourism. So this is high on the agenda, hugely relevant and highly topical, with many complex dimensions that need to be considered in order to make a success of successful tourism development in a destination. Before I introduce you to the panel, they've requested that they get to know you a little bit. So would you mind, just by a show of hands, just give us a kind of indicator as to what the constituency is in the audience? So would you mind raising your hand if you represent a sports organization or are from the sporting side of the equation? Okay, thank you. Those of you who are involved in destination development and the promotion of sports events as part of the destination development process. Those of you who are in the travel trade. Okay, and then finally, those of you who we could broadly call educators, consultants, students. Okay, you can always tell the students, they all sit together at the back of a room. Lovely, that's I hope you agree, Keith, a fairly even spread, I think, of interest. Okay, your panel today, as I say, it's a great privilege to be chairing these discussions, and I think from our earlier discussions this morning, I won't have to do too much in the way of intervention. But from my left, moving across the row, we have Mike Laughlin, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Sportcarl, and their remarkable index of global sports impact, which I'm sure you're going to refer to and enlighten us as to where that's going. We then have Lars Lundorf, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Sport Event Denmark. And I've never said this to you before, we've met on a couple of occasions, but a good number of the models of national event companies is based on your model. So thank you for helping Wales, for example, design its major events unit. We then go to David Grevenberg, Chief Executive Officer of the hugely successful Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games. David, welcome, and looking forward to you sharing those experiences. And then, last but not least, Peter Dodd, who is the Commercial Director of Welcome to Yorkshire. And if you're not aware, if you're not from any part of Europe that understands what happened in Yorkshire, where we had pianos being cycled up to the top of mountains as part of a month-long arts festival before the commencement of the Tour de France this year. A truly remarkable raising the bar in terms of multidisciplinary event development to make a sports event even more successful. I hope that does justice to what you do. So please welcome our panelists, and then we'll get into the discussions. Okay, can I begin, just ask perhaps Peter, yourself to comment, Lars and David, in terms of the major outcomes of those events which you've been involved in. Why did you go for this? Yorkshire, why did you go for this? Glasgow, what's the rationale behind it? And just fill us in with a little bit of insight as to where this begins. And then we'll come on to perhaps a reflection from you, Mike, as to what you're hearing and how that fits into what you're seeing on a bigger stage. Okay? Peter, do you want to kick us off? Tell us that backstory. Terry.
I suppose 3.5 years ago, we came up with a crazy idea to bring the world's largest annual sporting event to Yorkshire. We knew it was impossible that we could host or bid for the Olympics, the Commonwealth Games, or that we had a football stadium that was appropriate or suitable, never mind a team for the Champions League football or Champions League final. We wanted to bring the Tour de France to Yorkshire for a number of reasons. One, it was going to be transformational for the people of Yorkshire. It would bring communities of Yorkshire together. It would change lives. It would inspire our younger generation that things were possible. And we're starting to see the outcome of that. We wanted the Tour de France to come to Yorkshire because it was going to showcase the landscape, the topography, the iconic destinations, and it would showcase those around the world, and in particular Europe. And we wanted to bring our partners across Yorkshire, the private sector, the business sector, the local authorities, to unite and do something together that would leave a legacy or a way forward to work in the future. And lastly, as Welcome to Yorkshire, our remit is to promote Yorkshire, to persuade people to come work and live in Yorkshire, and ultimately to spend money in Yorkshire. And this summer, we invited 4 million people to come to Yorkshire. Unlike the Olympics, the Commonwealth Games, we didn't know where they were coming from. They didn't have a ticket. We didn't know how they were getting to us. We just had a gut feeling that somebody was going to turn up on that weekend. And again, unlike the Commonwealth Games, the Olympics, or a football match, the stadium was a moving track, 380 kilometres of Yorkshire, where you could descend on. It was a fabulous weekend. It went global. Would we do it again? Yes. 4 million people across Yorkshire, plus another 1 million on stage 3 into London. Bookings are up. Future bookings are looking very, very good. And there's a passion across Yorkshire that we now need to manage and live up to those expectations for future events.
So David, you were dealing with a very different construct, something that was presumably more than 3 years out in terms of its gestation, and a set of knowns, when actually Peter was dealing with a set of unknowns.
You know, the Glasgow 2014 journey is very much a 12-year journey. The success of Manchester in terms of using a major sporting event to regenerate a city, reposition a city's brand, and ultimately be a platform to build from, was incredibly compelling and really pushed Glasgow kind of into that pursuit. What manifested from that, so the regenerative theme was very, very strong throughout our narrative, and was kind of I would say, the foundation in which the games was built. And that was very focused on the infrastructure and revitalizing some areas in Glasgow that have suffered from social deprivation for years. And that was seen as a major catalyst. What manifested from that was a national strategy on major events that using the back of this games to really boost up the pursuit, confidence, and skills acquisition to drive a major event strategy well into the future. But instead of just doing post-games, it was seen as a pre-games focus as well, and events like the Ryder Cup and so forth continued to play in that space as well, and bolster quite a strong kind of Scottish focus on major events as well. And then, just by chance, this kind of regenerative theme became a refreshing theme. Refreshing conversations on sport, refreshing conversations on the relevance of sport in communities, and sport for social change, but also a big question on the Commonwealth. So we created a very, very large Commonwealth conversation. Why is your Commonwealth important to you? What is your Commonwealth? And we started to use the back of the games to not only have a Glasgow-centric perspective, but a national perspective in Scotland, and then a much, much broader conversation that would engage the people of the Commonwealth, the citizens of the Commonwealth, of which are 1/3 of the world's population, for those of you that may be less familiar, and a very young Commonwealth, of which of the 2.3 billion citizens, 1.3 are under the age of 24. So we tried to use a very, very strong youth focus in our event, which manifested itself in our volunteer strategies, our ticketing strategies, and ultimately how we presented sport on the field of play, all with showing this more aware, connected, and bold action-taking Commonwealth, which manifested itself in not only a great event that was world-class, but also an event that was very community relevant, which was very, very in keeping with what Glasgow wanted, but also what the Commonwealth movement needed at the time, and ultimately has built a bit of a platform now for the Commonwealth to build off on.
So the two of you had a similar set of motivations and objectives, which led to two different events. It would strike me that where the great success happened was in capturing hearts and minds of the resident community. And could I ask you, Lars, you're responsible for a national strategy for events, in which case you're looking at the whole panoply of opportunity from mass participation through to the different types of events we just heard described. How do you look at that rationale for selecting particular events?
Good morning, everyone. First of all, perhaps I should make a very brief introduction to what is Sport Event Denmark. Sport Event Denmark is the national sport event agency. We are established and we are also funded by the Danish government. And our aim is to attract and host major international sports events in Denmark. Taking into consideration that Denmark is a rather small country, as you know, we are not in a position where we can bid for the Olympics or bid for the FIFA World Cup, etc. But in terms of different world and European championships in different sports, we are in a position where we can play the game. So as I said, our aim is to attract those kind of international sports events. And we have some main criteria when we are evaluating the events. First, one of the very important ones is that the event should create excitement and interest back home in Denmark, and also create a strong interest from the Danish population and the Danish media as well. Secondly, the event should be able to attract a larger number of foreign guests. It could be the athletes, it could be the media representatives, it could be the officials, and of course spectators as well. Because as we all know, those foreign guests, they are generating revenue to the sports industry and also generating taxes for the Danish government in our case. And finally also that those events we are working with also should brand and promote Denmark internationally. So our aim, as I mentioned, is those World and European Championships, but also in some cases we are looking for the possibilities to combine an elite sport event with a mass participation event. We did it in March this year in Copenhagen, where we were hosting the World Championship in half marathon running. And it is for sure not the biggest World Championship in the world. It is around 250 athletes from around 60 countries, and just 1 hour, perhaps 1.5 hours. But we made this event much bigger because we add a huge mass participation half marathon race at the same day on the same track, and we had 30,000 runners during this half marathon, and it was a huge party, and it was fantastic. And I think if we can combine the elite sport and the mass participation sport, we can also create the events much better. And in this case, the International Athletic Federation, now they have actually a much better event. And I'm sure that the next edition, which will take place in 2016, also will combine the World Championship with a mass participation race.
Okay, thank you. Mike, listening to these comments and reflecting on, what contributes to nations or cities or destinations being at the top of their game in terms of being able to attract and host events, and putting it into the context of some objective analysis. What is it that you've heard that you would convey and carry through as some of those key messages?
I think it's very interesting. I mean, particularly Lars' example there of the World Half Marathon Championships. So Sport Cal basically gathers data and analysis on major sports events. We've been doing that for about 20 years now, and the last 3 or 4 years we've been basically undertaking a project called the Global Sports Impact Project, really trying to understand what the impact of major events is, both from spectators, from participants, from media, but also the social, the environmental, the holistic view of an impact of sport. And Lars, I think, has a fantastic example there with an event that I used to work for the IAAF, so I used to be involved in going to host cities and watching the World Half Marathon Championships take place, and it was, quite frankly, dull as dishwater, because it wasn't well thought out, it wasn't really very attractive, and it was actually quite hard to get cities to bid for it. And when I was looking at a piece of analysis this year on past World Half Marathon Championships, there's an extraordinary variation in the number of spectators going to an event like this. Typically, it's been somewhere between 12 to 20,000 as a spectator event. So not huge, but reasonable. And then you get Lars's statistic, which is 200,000 spectators. And you look at it and you go, well, that's madness. How can an event go from 12,000 to 200,000? And the answer is he introduced a 30,000 mass participation event around it, and quite rightly was rewarded by the IAAF for an incredibly innovative use of an event that really wasn't very strong. and has created probably a legacy for Denmark in the sense that a half marathon championship could take place every year, which didn't exist before. And I think this is the really exciting thing about the industry at the moment, is that we've got cities and governments who have typically wanted to attract events, and suddenly realizing that these events have more value than they perhaps thought. And so bidding for an event is a cost. Generally, it's a cost to a city, but it's also an investment, and it's a huge value, I think, to the global community. We have just done a piece of analysis on the data that we've gathered of 530 events that we've analysed in the last 8 years, which are all what I call the grade 1 events, the major world championships, the major multi-sport games. So 530 events over the last 8 years have attracted 90 million spectators, which is a phenomenal number of people. And we're estimating that that's at least 13 million overseas spectators who've travelled to these events, and that's for 500 events. In SportCal's database, every year we cover 30 to 35,000 events of major sports events that are media interesting. So the Premier League, if you look at the figures for 2011, 900,000 tourists came to watch football matches in the UK. That's nearly a million people generating £1 billion worth of spend just on football. So what London 2012 has done, and I think what Glasgow and Yorkshire have benefited from, is it's created a thirst for sport. It's created this appetite to go and watch sports events. I mean, the number of people I know who travelled up to Yorkshire or travelled to Cambridge or went somewhere to watch the Grand Depart was enormous. But not just that, you've got events like Ride London now, where there are 80,000 people applying to Ride London within a few hours.
Generated a thirst for sport?
Definitely. I was just going to pick up on Lars's point. I'm not a cyclist, so the bike race was a bike race that happened on a weekend over 3 days. Now, anecdotally, we know a lot of the people who turned up had got no idea the scientific, the logistics of how that race happened, the team dynamics, but they just wanted to be there because it was a once in a generation to be there. We also knew that we had to spread it from a 3-day event to a 6-month event. Terry mentioned we created a 100-day arts festival with Yorkshire Water. 750,000 people came to events in that period, 48 new commissions, 1,500 fringe events. It brought communities together. Over the 2-year period before the weekend, we did 400 road shows across the county, explaining what the bike race was. This was an opportunity for businesses to make money. It was a free event. We in effect bought all the tickets. So the pub on the corner on the route, you could have a hog roast, you could keep people hostage for the day or the weekend. You could do what you wanted to do. On the Thursday night, we had 12,000 people in the Leeds Arena for the first ever opening ceremony for the Tour de France. That went round the world across Europe. 12,000 people showing how passionate Yorkshire is. Not myself or Gary saying we're passionate about this event, but the consumers live on TV going wild. The riders, incidentally, hate the team presentation. We couldn't get them off stage. They were taking selfies. They were mesmerised by the passion and the audience. So much, in fact, that they actually arrived into London late because the first 2 stages were tough, the first time ever. And we promised the French the grandest ever Grand Depart. And they said we delivered it. And that impact on the people of Yorkshire, the people who came to Yorkshire, will live for generations, and we'll see the benefits in business shortly.
I think it's very fair to say that Giro d'Italia had a similar relationship and impact in Northern Ireland as well, didn't it? David, you would like to comment on
to pick up on Mike's point, the bounce of London 2012, particularly here in the UK, and I dare I'd say probably worldwide, has created, from both the Olympic and the Paralympic Games, has created a expectation in the world of sport that we now, as event organizers or federations, are needing to respond to. And what that is that these events, with an enormous amount of public funding that's going into them, needs to be conscious that we have to be accessible and inclusive. Accessible and inclusivity, and not just in terms of how you market yourself, but actually how your actions are reflecting your priorities, and whether that is how you open up a more participative based events, how you create interactive opportunities, or how you manage your social media campaigns openly. You're not just, it no longer is this a one-way conversation. These are two-way conversations, and you need to both respect it and engage it. So I think London 2012 certainly brought us all to a different level in terms of the expectation of the general public to be part of the actual event and be able to, and as an event organizer, you just, with a finite budget and a finite time to deliver, you need to be incredible, and with public pressure to spend public money effectively and efficiently. You absolutely need to show that you're accountable, but at the same time, create high-impact events as efficiently as possible. And there's a number of examples I could give for Glasgow, but I'll let others speak first.
Okay, well, we've been looking back, and we've been reflecting. Could we now pick up the title of this session, which is Future Trends? And without going through row to it's your turn, perhaps just could you chip in with some observations of some key trends that you're beginning to see now, either in terms of, the type of sports that are emerging, perhaps unknown sports or relatively little known sports that are commanding center stage, innovation and activity and trends in the bidding process, and, consumer. We've touched on it in this last few minutes about the consumer expectation, but I mean, it seems to me as an observer that there's a lot more blurring of boundaries. When does art end and sport begin, kind of? When does culture kick in as a major driver of a sports event? So please, can I suggest I'm going to challenge you, 2 trend identifiers each on any of those dimensions that I mentioned, be it sport, bidding, or the consumer, that you would like to float, and perhaps we can then stimulate some questions later about that. So, who's going to kick off?
I'm happy to start. Private, public, and third sector partnership. There's absolutely, almost every event that I've been working with over the past couple of years, absolutely there's a critical focus now that they need to work together in order for an event to be successful and effectively. And I think right now it's not captured enough on the bid side right now. Everyone's represented on the bid, but it doesn't actually show how they're working together in a bid. And I think what major event organizers and federations are going to move towards is really analyzing how the partnerships work during bid phase to make sure that that city, that location, that destination has got the broader consciousness, has got the support, and is ultimately going to do it with efficiency and effectiveness. So that's probably one trend I'm starting to see, is a demand for integrated, solution-oriented working.
Genuine integration of strategic alliances.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Lars?
I do agree in terms of partnerships. As I mentioned, we are a small country, so we definitely need to work together. And our model is quite simple. We have a close cooperation between 3 parties back home in Denmark. The first one is normally the National Sport Federation. It could be the Badminton Federation, the Handball Federation, cycling, etc. Then the host city, and in the end, our own organization, Sport Event Denmark. And we sit together right from the beginning and make a plan. How do we make this bid process, and when we are winning the bid, how do we organize and how do we plan the whole event? So I do agree, partnership and close cooperation is key. In terms of some trends, I think innovation is an important one. I'm talking about innovation in the event production. Perhaps it's not the biggest example, but next year in 2015, we are hosting the World Championship in archery. and it will take place in our capital, Copenhagen. And in some cases, this World Championship in archery is located not in the city center, but far away from everything. But next year we will have all the finals taking place right in front of the Danish Parliament. And it is a little bit similar to the archery Olympics for 2 years ago here in London, where it took place at the Lord's Cricket Ground, I think it was. And I think it was a fantastic venue for a minor sport like archery is. Yeah.
Could you take that innovation further? Could you, instead of a target, could you put a politician you don't like in front of the parliament?
We will consider that.
I think delivery of events is one thing that's been changing dramatically. We've seen London using the volleyball, the beach volleyball in Hyde Park. I mean, I think anybody that went to that venue came away going, wow, that was just incredible. The guys had 6 weeks to put that venue together because of various other things going on. And I think that it's that delivery where Lars is absolutely right. The Archery Federation worked out that actually putting an archery event out in the field in the middle of nowhere is not going to get spectators coming along. So putting it in the heart, I know they've had it sort of on the Bosphorus in Turkey. Yeah, so they've innovated in the way the venues are positioned, and I think also the innovation in fan festivals. We saw in Germany the World Cup. Fan festivals allows you to have this event taking place all over the city, not just in one venue, and so the ability to rethink the model and say, okay, we've only got a capacity of 80,000, but actually we can bring in a ton more people because we've got a fan park here and a fan park there. If you went to Vancouver integrated the Winter Olympics into the city. You were wandering around. It wasn't like a Winter Olympics, to be quite frank. It was 15 degrees in the heart of Vancouver. It was boiling hot. I was in a shirt sleeve wandering around. But I felt like I was part of the Olympics because they had massive screens all over the city. So everywhere I went, on every street corner, there was a skater or a skier or somebody. So they'd integrated the event into something which is very, very special. And where we're seeing is the ability of an event to deliver on time and on schedule and not get wrapped up necessarily in building massive stadiums. We've seen the disasters of Athens, really, to be honest, where I'm arriving the day that the opening ceremony is taking place and they're painting the grass green because they didn't have time to plant the grass. And I think that the IOC and a number of other people are recognizing they've got to rethink the model. Agenda 2020, which is Thomas Bach's opening entry as president, is to rethink how the Olympics as a federation, and I know we've got a few federations here, is how you're engaging with your host cities, and that's a partnership. It's a huge partnership between the people that are granting the event to the host country and the host country or the host city to engage with that group. And I'm seeing a massive change in the way the federations are now thinking about their hosts and that engagement.
Peter, in prompting you to talk about a trend, can I help shape that? I think one of the things that was remarkable to a UK audience was this integration of art as a forerunner, to the main event. Could I ask you to just reflect on that and ponder on that as a trend as you see it?
Yes, thanks, Terry. The integration of art, and I think in terms of future trends or Yorkshire bidding for events, the expectation of the bar is set very high, and that demand is coming from people who live in Yorkshire. What do we do next? I think people who lived in Yorkshire, and it happened in other destinations, they discover their own place they live and see things. And the Arts Festival was a concept we came up to expand the event, as I said earlier, to make it wider. Everywhere in Yorkshire wanted to host the Tour de France or wanted the race to go past them. That wasn't possible for a number of sporting, technical reasons or practical reasons. But the Yorkshire Festival, the Arts Festival, spread the love, spread the message. It wasn't a cycling festival, but the brief was to incorporate cycling. So if you saw the field art, from aerial views to sculptures that were created across the county, to, you know, us persuading people to knit bunting. And if you can persuade people to knit bunting, I think you can probably sell ice to Eskimos. But yeah, hundreds of kilometres of knitted bunting, so much so that North Yorkshire County Council had a problem in the north when the bunting got wet and the lampposts started to lean. We did point out to North Yorkshire that it was actually the lampposts that had a problem, not the bunting. But the festival brought millions of Yorkshire people together. It brought people into Yorkshire. Terry talked about the grand piano with 18 bikes towing a grand piano for 6 hours up, Home Moss, Crag Vale. And talk about legacy. This Saturday, the Lord Mayor's Parade, I'll be riding on that rig when we tow the grand piano around London as part of the Lord Mayor's Parade, taking that message further. But it went into schools. Hope and Social had 1,500 volunteers to create your own band. You know, and we did it with ASDA in places, and ASDA, you know, supported our tour makers. So we built on the games makers from London, created tour makers. 30,000 people pre-registered. We had 10,000 then who went through a training process, recruited by ASDA, fitted out, clothed. This volunteer force, again, it is a trend going forward. And we're looking at how we then train these so they can be stewards, they've got the right qualifications, they can stand there, so they can be used en masse, you know, across events across Yorkshire. So, and trends in terms of sports, you know, we've been approached by American baseball, tennis events, mountain biking again. We already host the World Snooker Championships in Sheffield. We've done sailing, we've done diving, we've done swimming. But I suppose, to David's point, the public purse is very tight now. So whether it's subvention or persuading people to bid, but actually by working in partnership, you can actually make that money go further and ultimately make sure you get the right event for the destination. And the sporting event is fantastic, it's global, but actually it's what's outside the arena. What happens on the playing surface is fantastic, but actually you want 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 happy consumers, visitors who are staying for 3, 4, 5 nights and spending money, and then going back and saying, you need to go to London, you need to go to Manchester, Glasgow, Yorkshire, and become our ambassadors.
I suppose what you've all been describing is the way in which you enhance a fairly formulaic approach to bidding by saying, well, we will do this around that core. It's that leveraging the event to do more and actually building that as part of the kind of subvention to show that you desperately want this event and it's part of your bidding process. I suppose that then comes back to this issue of partnerships. Lars, you mentioned the importance of that. Can I just ask you all to reflect upon what sort of partnerships in the future are likely to emerge in order to allow destinations to successfully bid for major events, or indeed, and I think this is one of the trends that are emerging, to curate your own event. You know, can you be clever and getting a partnership together that actually says, well, we can now do a mountain biking event that's truly ours and own it. So what type of partnerships do you all envisage are likely to be the templates for the future?
If I focus on less of the innovative and creative side, I think one of the, with the use of the public purse and more public accountability in processes around whether it's the bidding process or the actual delivery process of major events. One of the things that we certainly saw, I guess as an emerging trend, was the level of control and accountability that is required in running an event that ultimately shows that you're in control and you're accountable is absolutely critical. And so whether that is having a human rights statement to which you can report on a regular basis, which is one of the things that Glasgow 2014 put in place. We launched a human rights statement and then did a post-games report on our human rights agenda and how we actually lived our values in that area. You know, whether that was safeguarding children and the policies we put in place, whether that was how we did our hiring practices or how we ensured that a fair living wage was given by the majority of our contractors and suppliers. There's a lot of initiatives that we instigate in that area. To environment sustainability, to accessibility and inclusion, and setting new accessibility standards so that everyone can enjoy this experience, to health, safety, and well-being standards and our approach. Those probably 4 areas: human rights, environment, sustainability, accessibility, and inclusion, health, safety, and well-being, were absolutely critical for us to not only keep people at bay in terms of their confidence that we're not only delivering something, but how we're doing something is according to according to some standard, and that absolutely is something that that I think is emerging and moving forward, an absolute requirement of almost any major event.
Interesting, quite profound against quite a hedonistic. There's
Yes.
2 sides or 2 ends of the continuum.
If you're
there,
inclusive, you need to act inclusive, you need to be responsible. If you're running an exclusive event, which is okay, don't say you're inclusive. Market yourself as an exclusive event and be such. But if you're going to say you're inclusive, act inclusive, and be ready to face the accountability that comes with that.
Lars, you kicked off this importance of partnerships. How do you see it developing?
I think it is quite necessary to have the central government on board in terms of bidding for and hosting major international sports events also in the future, because the competition is definitely increasing, and also from a lot of new emerging nations worldwide. It could be the states in the Gulf, it could be the Russian part of the world, it could be Asia, and so on. And it's quite tough to bid and host a medium-sized events if you need to fund this event only from the ticket sales and so on. You can't do it. So you need some public funding, and I think it is in our case, it's very good that we have the central government on board and they are supporting us. So yeah.
Okay. Any clues from your research as to what the nature of this new type of alliance or partnership should be looking like?
Well, I think we're sort of touching on a lot of things. I think the important thing here is that sport actually delivers a lot more than just spectators and media coverage. And I think what events really now have to understand, and certainly I think this is true for host cities and for federations, is what is the true impact of these events and how do we understand more about those events. And if you look at something like Glasgow or London or the major games, or indeed the World Half Marathon Championships, you're looking at events that deliver more than just a sporting event, and they do inspire, they do get people doing sport. The number of times we've talked to people recently in governments and they're saying the problem we've got is obesity. How do we deal with obesity? I noticed with Glasgow, they integrated UNICEF within their opening ceremony, and engaging sort of the impact of children. Personally, I think sport needs to engage more with the communities and understand how a major event can leave a legacy. And I think sport is so vital in everyday life. And I just see it from my own examples. My son was in a cycling club before the games, which was 20 people. After the games, it was 120 people. And we've seen them riding when the Tour of Great Britain finished in London. There was an event for 150 young children integrated within the finish. So I think there's and a partnership engagement is a broader thing now. It's not just really about the federation, the sports federation, and the city government. I think it's bringing in all aspects of the host city country. And I think, as Lars quite rightly says, it's getting more competitive. This is the first time ever that a World Cup or an Olympic Games will not be hosted in Western Europe in a 10-year period. We're going into a period where, certainly for the next 3 Olympic Games after Rio, will be in Asia. And whilst we're not seeing that immediately impacting on the bidding of major events, I was in Turkmenistan last year where they're spending $6 billion on a sports complex in Turkmenistan. So Lars is faced with, a country that's just spent $6 billion on one of the most amazing sort of cycling arenas in the world. So the competition is growing. My index shows that Kazakhstan is coming through, that a number of new nations coming through, and so sport is global. It's not just the predominance of Western Europe now, which I think is a good thing, but it means that the competition is fierce, so we've got to be thinking about how we can deliver something unique and special when we're in the bid process.
So if I put X amount on the table, someone's going to come and trump it in the future, isn't it? Does that mean that destinations have to think more closely about their brand values, and you seek events that are a much closer fit to the destination profile, the assets of the destination, rather than perhaps be driven by political ego or some other motivation to have that mega event which many people will be bidding for? Is it about increasingly becoming cleverer and actually building stronger correlations between your profile and positioning as a destination with the type of event that you're going to be going for? I will run this one, so Peter, David, Lars, and then Mike. And then, gentlemen, if you don't mind, perhaps we could ask for some comments from the floor.
I think it is, Terry. It links to the last point. For us, any bidding process for a major event or selection of a major event is a business commercial decision. So an event would be targeted. There isn't a huge public pot to support that, but if there's a return on investment, 5, 10 to 1 on what it might cost, then you can get the buy-in and we can create the team that can bid and lead for that event. In bidding for that event, we're not bidding just because it's a sporting event. It's to enhance the brand. We have 3 Ps. It's about people. If we're going to support or bid for something, Leeds United get 20,000 people every other week. So why would we support something that's not going to get much more than that? We're looking for profile, international, national profile, broadcast, printed media, and ultimately the big one is, well, how much is it going to bring into the economy? Ultimately create, sustain jobs, enhance the wealth of Yorkshire. But the other side to building the brand is reputation of the brand, because it can be damaging if something goes wrong, or there's an incident in that sport, it's been documented, and then suddenly the media finds something out just as you're about to host that event. So there's pluses and minuses to managing your brand as well.
David?
Yeah, I think looking at, depending on your market, if you're an emerging market, if you're a regenerative market, or if you're a sustained market, you're looking at different motivations. And in some cases, you're dealing with anxiety in that market, and this is going to be the panacea that cures all our woes, and that's the main motivator. Or it's actually we're ambitious. We're ambitious, and this is where it's going to be a catalyst or a profile to drive us forward, or a combination of that. But each of those markets, I think you need to look at it for what it is. A lot of the bidding right now is putting apples and oranges against each other. And the equalizer is everyone needs to optimize, not just hit the minimal standards, but optimize the technical delivery of the event and showcase that. And then it becomes about narrative and position. And the narrative, so once, as an event federation, if you're analyzing, okay, I've got 5 great bids, all that meet the technical standards. Now it's about who's going to now enhance the brand and who's going to have the most compelling narrative, and that comes down to time, place, and purpose. Yeah. And that's something, and that needs to fit with the ambitions of the federation as well as the ambitions of the city, because it is a partnership. It's not simply the men and women from Del Monte coming to inspect the fruit every so often to make sure that the event runs effectively. It has to be a partnership so that everyone moves forward.
Slightly showing your age there with the Del Monte reference. Lars, echoing all of that, presumably.
Yeah, I think it is very important to try to identify the perfect match between the sport and the destination, as you just mentioned, Terry. because it wouldn't make sense for you guys in UK to host a handball championship, because handball is a very, very small sport in UK. But on the other hand, handball is huge in Denmark. It's actually number 2 sport in Denmark. So it makes sense for us to host a lot of championships in handball. So we have the European men's taking place this year, and next year we have the World's women, and in 2019 we have the World's men handball taking place. And also for 3 years ago we had the pleasure of hosting the World Championship in road cycling in Copenhagen and Copenhagen area. And it was also the perfect match because all Danes, they are biking. I think I don't know how many Danes are biking every day, but it's incredible, huge number. So the perfect match is important.
Okay, thank you. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's about doing your research and understanding both your domestic market, understanding what people want in your market, what's the interest. I'll give you an example. The Badminton World Championships was held in the USA in Los Angeles some years ago because they did a piece of analysis about what people at their venue wanted to see. And they discovered there was a huge interest in badminton. And of course it worked out there's a massive population on the west coast of America. So there was a huge badminton audience. They filled the stadium every day. It was a huge success. And the Badminton Federation didn't know that they had a community in that area. So it's about, for me, and particularly as I come from a research data background, it's understanding what people in your city or in your country want to see, want to engage with, how you can engage with them, and then equally doing your research on the events that you're bidding for and understanding who it is you're dealing with, going out and talking to those people, getting your national bodies engaged in the process. And this is what we're seeing a lot more now, is countries recognizing that they need to do their research and they need to understand what it is that they should be bringing to their cities and countries. And actually sports also understanding more about their events. And that's very much the whole piece that I've been pushing with this Global Sports Impact Project, is to say there is more to sport than just spectators and television. And you need to understand what your events are delivering so that when you go to meet your host cities and your host countries, you can tell them the stories. And it is the narrative, as David quite rightly says, it's the narrative.
I think to Mike's point, I mean, I think one of the things that you start to see is that a lot of places now are much, much more aware of how it was done in other locations. So citizens, because social media and the internet has opened up best practice to everyone, that there's cost comparison. So, no longer can you pull the wool over a government or the public's eyes, just saying this is going to bring all types of great benefits. There's a level of accountability now when you're pursuing an event that you need to get all sides on board to be able to take it to the decision makers and be able to clearly justify that this is going to actually happen. I think there's another, and there's one of the things that we followed in Glasgow that was, Mike and I were talking about this before we came on stage, was the expectation that ethics in public life are respected in hosting these events now. And the narratives that you create need to reflect that. And there's 7 principles, to call the Nolan principles, to public life, that are absolutely, I would say, are universally applicable when building your strong narrative. And I think the world of sport, you'll start to see more events and so forth having to build that into their strategies and not only preach it, but actually action it as well.
Okay. I was hoping there'd be time for questions. I'm getting a nod from the back of the room that this room has to be vacated relatively quickly. In that context, I'm sure these 4 good gentlemen wouldn't mind taking questions or being approached from you individually in the concourse, so if you don't mind holding your questions or observations and address them personally. Can I thank Mike, Lars, David, Peter on your behalf? Would you join me in showing your appreciation of them? For me, there were just three big summary messages from this very complex, exciting, and powerful world that we're looking at is, I think, always begin with the question why. Why are we doing it? The second thing is partnerships, absolutely key, but think about what partnerships you need to answer the question why. And then I think the third thing that is emerging from this is get the narrative right. And I suppose that comes back to why as well, isn't it? That always ask why. So thank you very much indeed. A summary of the discussions will go up on the W2 website very soon. And I'm going to end with an advertisement, the Sport Tourism European Summit, Limerick, May next year. Check the websites, please sign up to it. It is intended to advance these discussions further. Thank you for attending. Thank you to W2 Consulting. And thank you, gentlemen, very much indeed.